Did cavemen really only live to be 30 years old? Hi, I'm Tom and this is my carnivore life. I have a real problem with a lot of these averages that they tout on different topics. But the one that really gets me is the average lifespan of cavemen. So the sensationalized headline was, well, the average caveman only lived to be 30 years old. Well, if that's the case, that means they would have been having children at 10, 12 years old. And I just don't see that happening. The problem with this averages model that they've come up with is it doesn't account for different variables. Things like infant mortality and dying from things as simple as an infection. They didn't have medicine like we have. So simple things that we take for granted now that we can put a topical on could have killed them. So you really have to look at the overall picture of the environment that they lived in and kind of eliminate those things that were health related that we couldn't have controlled. So if you do that and then you look at the cavemen that made it to adulthood, the lifespan's a lot longer than 30 years. The other issue with that is we really don't have a plethora of skeletons from cavemen that we can go back to and really get an idea of how long they lived. They don't exist. So to sit there and say, well, they only lived to be 30 years old on average is very misleading. Now you fast forward up to the 1700s and you think, okay, well, it's been, 10, 15, 20, 100,000 years. Surely our lifespan increased. Well, on average in the 1700s, 35 to 40 years old. Again, we didn't have the modern medicine that we have now, so simple things could have killed people. Malnutrition was one of them because, let's face it, when you're a feudal society, the people at the top were the ones that ate well, and then the further down the chain you went, the worse you ate. You had the plague. There were all kinds of things that contributed to that lifespan being so short. Then you go into the 1800s, you're like, okay, well, medicine has improved, so our lifespan should have gone up even more. Nope. Average lifespan in the 1800s was 40 years old. Again, infant mortality, simple things like infections. There's so many things that can contribute to the lifespan of a society that you really can't do these averages. Now, if you look back, and I'm going to go back to the 1700s because it's a really good case study. Because if you look at a lot of our founding fathers, a lot of them lived to be 80, 90 years old. So, that shows you right there that if you didn't have, typhoid or cholera or tuberculosis or simple infection or anything like that, you could live a fairly long life, pretty similar to what we have now. And I would argue that there's probably some that lived even a lot longer than what we do now. And you can even go to the Plains Indians. And again, this is very similar to the caveman study. Well, the average Plains Indian only lived 30 to 40 years old. True, but you have to take out for infant mortality, warring parties, and the real skewer for this metric is all the diseases that Europeans brought over that decimated the populations. So you really can't use that as a gauge either. Now you come into the turn of the 19th century when medicine became more modern and we had things like aspirin, which was invented in the late 1800s. We kind of figured out a little bit about bacteria and viruses by then. So we were able to treat some of these, and that helped the average lifespan to be extended until you get to, the 50s and 60s, and we have the lifespans that we currently enjoy. It's not to say that people back then didn't live just as long as we did. It's just that there were variables, whether environmental or accidents or what have you, that caused a short lifespan. It wasn't because of what they were eating. It wasn't anything like that. And that's where I have a real problem with these studies that come out. And, And you get people on one side or other of the diet spectrum that want to use these and say, well, they only lived an average of 30 years old because they didn't have access to quality food. Well, not necessarily true. I'm sure that did occur in some instances. But, you know, as hunter-gatherers, our ancestors would have primarily been after meat because meat was sustaining, it was caloric dense, it was highly nutritious, and that's what they would have eaten. Now, they would have eaten nose to tail, and we even have evidence in some of the areas that we found where they lived through refuse that has been discovered that they actually ate the marrow out of the bones. So nothing went to waste on these animals. They ate everything that they could possibly eat, and whatever was left was used as either clothing or tools. So you really can't say that, you know, on the one hand, well, they didn't live as long because they ate saturated fat. Well, that's not true. Now, did they eat nuts, seeds, and things like that? Of course they did. And honey. You know, sugar wasn't even a thing yet. But those items would have only been available for a very short time in the summer, and then it was gone. So, you know, to think that they ate a plant-based diet year-round is ridiculous. It just didn't happen. Now, there are caveats to that, because if you had people that lived in like a rainforest or, you know, around the equator or something like that, then obviously vegetation is available all year long. So, but those are outliers. That's not and I hate to use this term, but that's not what the average caveman would have access to. So to sum this up, before you go and believe all of these average lifespan claims that keep coming around, you need to really look at it and see what was causing that average to go down. And then you eliminate those things that we now can treat and cure or prevent, and then look at the average lifespan. I'd wager to say that the average lifespan of a caveman was probably more in the 50 to 60 year range, with some outliers going up in the 70s and 80s. And the same is true with the 1700s, all the way up through. It was just the luck of the draw whether you died early or you lived a long life. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope that kind of gives you a little bit of understanding of where these averages come from when one side or the other wants to tout their diet or their way of eating or weight loss or whatever. You really, and I've said it before, you really have to dig into the data. You can't just take it at face value, because you need to know what the driving force is behind whatever claim they're making and get to the real numbers. So give me a like, subscribe, leave a comment below. Let me know what you think. Let's get a discussion going about the average lifespans and how these have been skewed. And as always, have a great day.